Always with my year trade predictions videos. Today we do Arizona State sign Devils. Arizona State's non-conference schedule is pretty much the same as last year. Last year they played two little teams and Mississippi State. This year that's what they play. The two little teams are Northern Arizona and Texas State, and that should make it a pretty easy non-conference schedule. But the Mississippi State game last year did end up being pretty close, and as much as I hate to say it, with me being an Ole Miss fan, as horrible as Mississippi State was last year, you really have to think they'll be a little bit better this year. But I still think they're going to be the worst team in the SEC and one of the worst teams in the Power Four again. So it would be shocking, I think, if Arizona State didn't go 3-0 in the non-conference. And the conference schedule is going to be much different this year. Arizona State has 6 out of 9 different conference opponents this year. So last year they played Kansas, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, Central Florida, Kansas State, and BYU. And instead, this year they'll play Baylor, TCU, Houston, Iowa State, West Virginia, and Colorado. And some good news about this change is last year Arizona State had to play 2 of the 3 other top 4 teams in the Big 12, BYU and Kansas State, and this year they only play one, Iowa State. But some bad news about it is last year Arizona State got to play 4 of the bad teams in the Big 12, but this year in the new schedule, they only play one of the really bad teams from last year, Houston. But you have to remember that the Big 12, I think, is the most even conference in the country right now, and there's a whole lot of close games every year in the Big 12, and there's really no guaranteed conference win for anybody. Houston would be the closest to it for Arizona State, but you do have to also remember that even though Cincinnati was one of the bad teams in the conference last year, they were actually one of the 2 teams that beat Arizona State. So the bye weeks both come at, I think, good times. So the first one comes after what's going to be a pretty tough 2 in a row, Baylor and TCU, and right before what I think is going to be a tough one on the road at Utah. Baylor and TCU were solid teams last year, and Baylor returns a lot of production, and TCU, I know, returns a really good quarterback. It would be pretty surprising, I think, if Arizona State went 2-0 and those two. And Utah, even though I know they were not very good last year, I watched that game and it was close. That was the game where Cameron Rising was playing when he could barely walk, and the game was really won by Arizona State because of Gadaboo having a huge game, and he's gone now, and Kyle Whittingham really always has a pretty good defense, and I still think that he's one of the best coaches in the country when it comes to the line of scrimmage. So I think that this is a very losable game for Arizona State. And them playing Texas Tech right after that is going to make another tough, 2 in a row. Texas Tech was actually the other one of the two teams that beat Arizona State last year, and Texas Tech ranks fourth in the country in returning production at 75%. So I think it's going to be unlikely for them to go 2-0 in those two. Also, I think it's impossible, really, for Arizona State to go 4-0, and the Baylor, TCU, Utah, and Texas Tech 4 in a row. 3-1 is probably the best they can do. And the second bye week comes at a good time, I think, because it comes right after the road game against Iowa State that I think will probably be the toughest game on Arizona State's schedule. And it might be the biggest game in the conference this year because it's a rematch of the conference championship from last season. And Arizona State, I know, blew them out in the conference championship last year, but that was really because of uh, Scadaboo. And I think this will be a tough one for Arizona State to win. Iowa State is one of the toughest places to play in the Big 12 conference, and one of the tougher places to play in the country. But some good news for Arizona State is in that game last year, their really good receiver, Jordan Tyson, did not play, and he's back this year. And as long as he doesn't get hurt again, he'll be playing in that game. And Iowa State loses their two best receivers from last season. And I've talked about Iowa State's Rocco Beck probably being one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12 this season. But I think Arizona State's Sam Levitt could be too. I think he's pretty good. And West Virginia, I don't think is going to be very good this year, but they probably won't be at the bottom of the conference. They'll probably be more of a middle type of team. And Arizona State, I know it was a really good team last year because of how they played Texas in the playoff game, but they did have a whole lot of close games, and they did really well in them. They went 6-1 in close games, and usually, if a team does that well in close games, one year, the next year, they're not going to do as well. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be the case for Arizona State, but it's just the way it goes. But Colorado should be a win, I would think, for Arizona State. I'm not expecting much from Colorado this year, and why would I? Because they lose the two players that carried them last season. And I know their defense was better last year, but if Travis Hunter would have been out, there would have been a noticeable difference because he was that good. And Jador Sanders really carried their offense last year, and their offensive line is going to be uh, terrible. And it's not like they have a good coach where you can be optimistic. Deion Sanders and Kenny Dillingham are similar in that they both became the head coach of teams that were in the garbage can when they got there and had a terrible first year there, and then they both had a good second season. But I'm a lot more optimistic about Kenny Dillingham's future as a head coach than I am Deion Sanders is because the biggest reason is that Kenny Dillingham is actually a real coach and Deion Sanders isn't. He just pretends to be and wears those ridiculous sunglasses, acting like he knows what he's doing. And Arizona, you would think, would be a win for Arizona State right now, but it's a rivalry game, so you never know. But I right now don't think that Arizona is going to be very good. So now for the point spread prediction. Games in the green are games where I think Arizona State will be favored to win by a blowout, which is 20 or more points, and there's two of those, Northern Arizona and Texas State. Games in the blue are games where I think Arizona State will be favored to win by double digits, 10 to 19 points, and there's three of those, Mississippi State, Houston, and Arizona. Games in the purple are games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a touchdown, 6 to 9 points, and there's one of those, West Virginia. Games in the pink are games where I think they'll be favored to win by about a field goal, 1 to 5 points, and there's five of those: Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, Utah, and Colorado. And games in the gray are games where I think Arizona State will be about a field goal underdog, so 1 to 5 points, and there's one of those, Iowa State. So Northern Arizona, the spread in that one should be like 45 points. They're an FCS team. And Texas State, I think the spread in that one will probably be close to 20 points, because Texas State, I know, is one of the better group of five teams. And they actually played Arizona State last year and almost beat them. And Mississippi State and Houston and Arizona. And right now, I'll say that Arizona State will be favored in all three by about two touchdowns, maybe 14 points. But I wouldn't be shocked if any of those ended up being in the purple. And West Virginia, Arizona State should be favored by 8 or 9 points. And Baylor, that one's in the pink because it's a road game. It'd be in the purple if it was a home game. But I'll say Arizona State will be a 3 point favorite in that game. And at TCU, I think Arizona State will be favored by about 5 points. And Utah, that would be in the purple if it was a home game, but because it's on the road, I think Arizona State will be favored by, I'll say, 5 points. And Texas Tech, that one's really in the pink because even though it's a home game, they beat Arizona State last year. So I'll say they'll be favored in that one by 5 points. And Colorado, that one would probably be a purple game if it was a home game, but because it's on the road, I'll say Arizona State will be a 3 point favorite. And Iowa State is in the grave because it's a road game. If it was a home game, or probably even if it was a neutral game, Arizona State would be favored. But because it's on the road, I'll say Iowa State will be favored by about a point. But I'd say the ceiling is probably last year's record, 10-2, for Arizona State. But it's possible that the season could go bad for them. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.